right? I've always said you need a great lawyer and you need a great accountant. Those two things are like inevitable. But they look at me and I go, oh, you've never looked at your cap table.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to the Founders in LA podcast. I'm your host Ethan Cole, and this is an opportunity to shine the spotlight through a product lens on some of the exceptional founders we have as part of the LA community in an unedited, one-take organic conversation. With us in the studio today is Joshua Lee. Hey Joshua, really excited to have you here.
Hey Ethan, I've always wanted to do that. I didn't notice that until now, but hey Ethan, I'm glad to be here.
Happy to be here on the radio, the Founders in LA station.
Amazing.
XFL.
I'm a big fan, number one. So I've listened to the podcast. I had some friends who were founders on the podcast, and now to be in the hot seat is amazing. Thank you for having me.
I'll turn this into a morning radio show soon enough. But first, a word from our sponsors. Nearshore, we're brought to you by Nearshore. Nearshore is a trailblazer in nearshore outsourcing and staff augmentation. With over 15 years of experience offering exceptional Latin American software development, data, talent, product design, and talent for U.S. companies, Nearshore has revolutionized the way that companies scale their teams. They stand apart with 50% female leadership, are trusted by companies large and small, and have been helping U.S. customers grow since before nearshoring was cool. Discover how Nearshore can power your tech goals and help you stay lean while scaling fast. Learn more at www.nearshore.com. That's www.neasure.com. We're also brought to you by Unita. Unita Club is a co-working space that sets itself apart. With locations in El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, and Hermosa, Unita is where creativity flourishes. Unlike traditional offices, they provide an inspiring environment where ideas can thrive and businesses can grow. With Unita, there's no hidden fees, flexible terms, options for dedicated offices, and unlimited access to conference rooms, a photo studio, this podcast studio, plus standard 3D printers and 24/7 access at their locations. They're local champions who support neighborhood businesses, open their event spaces to nonprofits, and celebrate art, music, and culture. Join Unita Club and experience co-working like never before. Learn more at www.unita.club. Our guest today is Joshua Lee. He is the co-founder, the founder and CEO of Ardius. Hey, Josh, can you, among a number of other companies, Josh, could you please give us a 30-second description of Ardius?
Yeah, it's basically free money. So everybody stop what they're doing and listen to this. So basically, we all love taxes, right? No, I think that's an oxymoron. But how do you know if you've claimed every single credit and every deduction on your tax returns? I mean, it's ironic when we're filming this, it just passed, but that's what we do. We're trying to figure out if you've claimed everything that's eligible to you, right? And if you have claimed it, how do you know you've maximized everything? So what we've done is, our thesis is we wanted to codify the Internal Revenue Code. I know that sounds so sexy, right? But the Internal Revenue Code is a bunch of rules and algorithms. And so what we've done is we've taken data inputs from your payroll, from your general ledger, and from your tax returns, put it through a algorithm, and we've flagged everything that we think you've missed in form of a credit or deduction. And if you've already claimed it, there's a good likelihood maybe you're not maximizing it. So that's what our software Ardius does. It's something that we thought was practical for even as an investor, right? As companies were asking for more checks, or like, have you maximized every single dollar on your tax return? And they're like, no, because we don't either have a bookkeeper yet, or we're not sure what things we qualify for. So we actually built the software, ironically, for our own portfolio company, out of our own venture studio. And so that was where Ardius was born. So,
and I mean, the U.S. tax code is so ripe with these little places where you could probably do more if you know where to look, and which is why you'll have the Fortune 10 companies spending like $0 on taxes because they just know where to find all these things. And I imagine why a lot of SMBs and smaller companies probably aren't using as much of it as they could because they just don't know better. So giving them an easy button, connecting directly to their books.
That was easy. Yeah, it's funny because when most conversations with startups and SMBs, I say, hey, Ethan, can I talk to your bookkeeper? And they're like, sure, honey, right? And it's like someone's significant other, maybe it's their spouse, maybe it's someone's neighbor / uncle or auntie. And it's like, oh, no one's actually taken a look at your books yet, And so a little bit about me and my background. I came from one of the big four accounting firms. It was big five back in our day, but I was at Ernst & Young. I was doing taxes. So I'm a CPA by trade. We kind of get into the journey, but that's where I started.
Please, yeah.
And so did that for 12 and a half years. So by all accounts, a historian. Most people on average stay 3-4 years, but I stayed 12 and a half years and loved taxes. That's what made me a tax nerd. And so for me, this is breathing, like finding free money, making sure that we're maximizing everything. That was literally, like second nature to me. So going into startups, and we'll get into how I made that jump, but going into startups, this is like a pot of gold. I'm like, no one's really looked at this stuff. And so you're right. This was at the big four. Most people who can maximize these things or even democratize it or know about it, you're paying, I don't know, my bill rate was like, what, $12.50 an hour? That's $1,250, not $12.50.
Yeah.
I thought I was a ripoff at the time, right? So, but how would you have found some of these things if you don't have accessibility to that information? So that's why we figured software would be the best fit, because we're in an election year. Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter, right? People are loving innovation. They want to get this money into the free money into the hands of the SMBs and startups, but they'll throw everything very controversial underneath these bills, and so that's where it sometimes stalls, or people don't know if the law is changing, but everyone wants businesses to do well, so no one's going to be against that, right? So
and everyone hates overpaying, especially when you didn't have to, and so that's fascinating. So you were able to create Ardius to help solve your own problem. Where did you get the bug? Like, where did this all start? Right, I believe at this point you're 9 startups in. So where did the first one come from, and when did that start?
Yeah, so literally, I mean, it started at Ernst & Young. I was fortunate enough to work with one of the, I think, best entrepreneurs, right? I mean, true, they were already Fortune, 100 companies, participated with Entrepreneur of the Year. That's one of Ernst & Young's, programs to highlight the best entrepreneurs. And I would spend time with these entrepreneurs. I would spend time with my clients. I would spend time with my founders, right, where I'm helping them. And it was such a contrast. I came from a very, very conservative background, both fiscally and financially and even personality. So culturally, self-praise was no praise. I was taught to, put your head down, do the work, 9 to 5, get the corner office, great job. Education was important, right? I graduated early from undergrad. I got my master's in another year in the same time. So that was all great. And, again, I was raised by a single mother. My dad passed away very, very young. And so hanging out with these entrepreneurs and getting time well spent with them and asking them, how did you do the jump? This is incredible. And wanting to do what they do, but having a personality that was completely the opposite.
Right.
Completely the opposite. Do you remember, and I know you and I are similar in age, you said, right, before the show. I'm dating myself. There is a show called Seinfeld. Do you remember that show?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
There is a character named George Costanza, right? Total character, somewhat of a hey, woe is me, the sky is falling sort of character. Do you remember the episode where he evaluates his life and he says, if everything I've done to this point in my life has been the wrong decision, the opposite must have been the right one, right? I don't know if you remember that episode.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to think of the order he makes after that moment. He's like, oh yeah, it's the opposite of egg salad. It's tuna on rye.
That's right. So he's sitting there, he's like, I'm going to get, instead of this, I'm going to get that. Or is the healthiest food or meal he can, right?
Right.
The opposite, right? And there's a really, attractive lady at the bar who hears over here, that's what I ordered, right? Gets to know her, walks up to her, going to do the opposite, right? Says, what do you do? Says, I'm jobless and I live with my parents, right? The opposite. And she's like, that is so refreshing. I've never, can I have your number or do you want my number, right? And then the show keeps proceeding, it culminates with the Yankees, remember?
Right, yeah.
Meets George Steinbrenner and says, nice to meet you, George. And he's like, well, I wish I could say the same about you. You've taken our beloved Yankees and made it a laughing stock. But, he says, hire this man, right? So he gets a job with the Yankees. So there came a point where I was like, wow, everything that I've done has been good for the corporate life, right? 12 and a half years, Ernst & Young. What about being an entrepreneur? How do you take a risk when you don't have perfect data, right? How do you, and I had an opportunity to work with friends who became entrepreneurs. They were in investment banking. They became VCs. And the funny thing about my friends, none of them, there's like 8 or 9 of them, none of them made it past their first year in venture capital. And the reason why, not because they can hack it, it's because they ended up taking seed rounds from their respective VCs. They're like, oh, you're going to invest in other people's ideas? Invest in our ideas. So they ended up taking seed rounds. And guess who they came to find as their first token board member, investor slash accountant, right? This guy. And so I started seeing these pitch decks, business plans, and I was literally being called throughout the day. Hey, are you Joshua Lee? Are you the financial advisor of so-and-so startup? And I go, yes, I am, right? And I was like literally texting on my, Motorola 720, like flip phone. Hey, what company is this? What are we doing? What are you doing? But it brought me such joy, like literally being able to fundraise with my friends and seeing it be theirs, right? I think that was the first seed that was sown, right? Because I was like, wow, we just raised $250,000. We just raised $500K. And here I am just moving, money around at Ernst & Young. It's like in the, hundreds of millions, but nothing brought me more joy than seeing my friends succeed.
Than $200,000.
Yeah, just that $250,000. That's no small chump change either, but it brought me such joy. And I was, sharing that with my wife. I just recently got married, trying to have family. And I was like, there's something about raising money, and there's something about seeing my friends do the startup, taking that leap of faith and not having perfect information and not, knowing that, where their next paycheck is coming from or, what, office they have and lifestyle they're going to live. Like they're doing it. And I was so proud of them. But that was where I think the first seed was sown. Yeah, seeing that happen.
So then how did you make that first leap into starting your own company from there? So the seed was sown. How did you create the first one? The
first one was, 12 and a half years later, I decided, it's all about the money and all about the job title. It's time to leave. And for me, luckily, fortunately, I was able to save. So I had a little bit of cushion. And I think the all-star answer here is, my wife, super all-star. She was like, you know what, Josh, go for it. Life is too short. Carpe diem. It's not about the money, right? It's about maximizing what you love to do. And so she instilled that. And she gave me the courage and the support to actually do it, number one. And when I left, I had no clue. I did not know. I remember some of the partners sat down with me and said, you're leaving to a competitor, aren't you? You're taking the book of business with you, aren't you? No, I'm honestly wanting to make that jump and be a founder, maybe even an investor. I found like venture capital might be the road. And I ended up from there starting a venture studio, actually. So at that time, we called it venture building. I tried to make that phrase cool. Not venture capital, because I couldn't write those zeros after certain checks, but I would build with you. So I would say, hey, what's your idea? Do you need a back office? Do you need marketing? Do you need product? Do you know legal? I know a lot about everything, right? Having helped all these companies the last 12 and a half years. The phrase never really took off. I think it's now called a venture studio. People are like, oh, so you put in checks of 50, 100, follow on. And yeah, we started building companies and helping them grow, start, execute, and then eventually exit. So that's where the first inklings of like, oh, this is how startups work. So, putting it into 3 different pillars, right? Starting, executing, and then exiting, right? And so we figured out, oh, we're going to get really, really good at starting them or helping them execute, right? And we didn't have an exit yet, but once we tasted what that looked like, we were like, wow, that's incredible, right? That's the fun part. That's everyone celebrates, everyone wins, usually on an exit. And so from there, we figured out, look, there's only 4 outcomes to any given startup. Like I'm oversimplifying for your audience here, but it's 1, you're going to go IPO, right? Take it to the moon, you grow it. Number 2, you get acquired, right? There's some sort of exit there. 3, and I'm being a little bit facetious here, but if you wait long enough, you're going to go bankrupt, right? You go bankrupt, belly up.
Right.
And then 4, it doesn't get enough credit, but pun intended. It's a lifestyle business, right? It's like, hey, nobody, is mad at you, mad respect, right? Cash flow, it's doing well. You may not even have to raise money, but that gets kind of set aside because it's always, I got to get into the front pages of TechCrunch, got to be Forbes 30 under 30, 40 under 40.
Yeah. How much did you raise, and kind of
how much do you
value
raise
yourself on the amount that you raised rather
That's
than
right.
actually how much you bring.
That's
in.
right. And then you take dilution, but people don't understand that dilution because, we'll talk about cap tables later, but yeah, people don't. So there's only 4 outcomes, and we got really very succinct in our thesis. We're like, if you're doing a lifestyle business, actually we would encourage you not to raise money. So, we should respect that. Hopefully no one goes belly up. No one comes in here going, yeah, I hope I get, go bankrupt.
Yeah.
No one does that. So now we're left with the first 2, right? IPO and being acquired, right? I've seen the process as Ernst & Young, right? Helping companies go IPO. And that took anywhere from, on average 8, 15 years. I had one friend who had one of those startups get to the point of preparing for an IPO, eventually got acquired, but we were set up to help them go IPO. I saw the costs, I saw the stress, I saw how long it took, and I was like, wow, this is a long process. So then I started thinking about, that just leaves getting acquired. And so getting acquired to me was the pathway that was 1, least resistance, and 2, gave us a lot of control because, although we were venture building, what we also started doing, funny enough, was we would work with these founders, co-founders, and we would really go deep, right, into one vertical in that startup. And then we would be like, wow, we discovered new things in that particular vertical. What if we spun something off and created a kind of an ancillary or offshoot idea? Right? We would include, obviously, the founder, as part of that. But guess what happened? We realized quickly, hey, wait, when we spin something off, we own 100%, right? I mean, we're going to give a percentage back to the founders, but now we had all the percents to build a team. We would look for a CEO, maybe look for a COO, look for the first 10 employees. And what we realized was on the timeline of things, right? Just to give some contrast to you and the audience. First exit, I was able to participate. Like my friend's company, it was a unicorn. I'm not complaining. I was very blessed, to even exit and not lose your money or your time. But I ended up with less than 0.25% on the exit. So still,
And you must have started early on.
Oh, I got diluted.
Yeah, because you're not.
They were
you're
like
not
series.
writing unicorn checks the first one.
No. This is like series. They got to series E or F, I believe.
Okay.
Right, and then got acquired. But again, I was blessed to participate in it. Got a taste of what being acquired or having an exit. And again, I wasn't the lead on it. I was a good friend, and so that's where I was like, wow. But if we spin things off, right? What if we end up exiting, right, earlier? Right? What if we own 95% of the company? What if we own 90% of the company? And some of these things we were able to start achieving, we started exiting in 3 years. We started exiting in 5 months, right? Like little things like, wow, they wanted to buy the brand. Great. So it's like, wow, maybe the math does work out if you can, plan ahead. And so that's where we started learning about getting acquired and building because I look at a lot of pitch decks now on the investor side as well, right? I'm a scout for a couple funds in LA, have a family office that we invest out of, and inevitably you get, right now it's really cool, right? You get like an 8 to 12 page deck, right? We used to write business plans when we were growing up, but now it's a deck, and inevitably there's one slide in there that says, this is our exit, and it's like a hockey stick. Right, or they list out in some cases companies. These are the ones that are going to acquire us, and it's big time, right? It's like these big names you've heard of. And my question to them has always been, have you talked to these companies? Do you maybe have had a conversation? And the reaction is always, no, like too early. This is our secret sauce. Like we can't share this. And I'm thinking, not to burst your bubble, but if they wanted to, they probably could crush you. They probably could do it, and they could probably do it, But what I believe in are the founders, the execution, right? That we can still do it better, faster, cheaper, quicker, better, right? More nimble as a startup. And so that's what I'm banking on, right? And so we started getting really good at having these conversations. And I think, being in LA, being in SoCal, 12 and a half years of serving Fortune, 100, 500 companies at UI, I grew a really big Rolodex, right? And kind of forced myself to be outgoing, right? Again, I'm George Costanza, right? I forced myself to be outgoing, networking, and had a really strong Rolodex and said, why don't we have a conversation? What are you guys doing in this space, right? And oftentimes it's funny. I've gotten reactions from companies that have said, Josh, we're going to crush you. We are doing this. I said, great. Self-deprecating humor would. Great. But it's funny. I can't find it. I can't find, so my last company is a great example, to convince my wife. I had already done 8 startups, exited. We were done. And we're now just investing in companies. And we came upon this idea for Ardius, which is, hey, free money. How do you know what you don't know? Let's build something. So summer 2019, 2 friends of mine knew them from church. They came back. They had just exited their company. They're just sitting there hey, Josh, what's the next thing you're doing? I'm just investing in startups. But they overheard my conversation with some of the accounting firms. Hey, I have 23 investments, right? You're welcome. Wrapped in a bow, please service them. And you know what they said to me, Ethan? They said, Josh, we love you, and you'll always be welcome here, but your companies are too small. We can't service any of them. We don't even know how you're going to get paid if we service your companies, right? And even the one company they were interested in, we had about 10, 12 employees, full-time employees. We were pre-revenue. Right? It was one of those we needed, And so that R&D credit was probably something like $100,000, $125,000. I got an RFP, a proposal for $75,000 to $100,000. It cost the exact amount it took to get the credit. For the credit, or they would at least benefit more than we would as a startup.
Right.
And so I literally presented that RFP and got laughed out of the boardroom. Josh, this is crazy. We just raised a seed round. We're not spending this much on tax, right? And so that's why summer of 2019, it was, let's just build it. To my 2 co-founders, they were like, we should build this. And I was like, no, but we did, summer 2019, and it worked. It was maybe half-heartedly it worked, right? So I would finish the rest, but it worked. And so what was funny was some former colleagues had moved to a different accounting firm, and they said, Josh, we want to license this. My first reaction was, license what? This is a love project at best, right?
Right.
But they wanted to license it. So I said, sure. They ended up licensing it. 3-4 months go by. We saw how much money they made, right? And so my 2 other co-founders came over and had an intervention with me, 2 developers. Josh, we didn't build this to make other people more money. I go, to make ourselves more money. He goes, no, we want to help startups. We just want to help startups, and this is not it. So I go, what do you want me to do? You want me to go door to door to door? And they're like, oh, yeah. And I was like, no, I don't have time. I don't have time for this, but I'll do you one better. I co-invest with a lot of funds in LA. Mucker down the street here, right? Operate studios. We have a lot of friendlies here. So I said, why don't we go talk to them? So, and I told the managing partners, Eric Ranala, Will C, I said, hey, if we do pitch this, can you just let these kids down easy? I say kids, but they're maybe in their mid to late 20s. Can you let them down easy? It's oh, sure, Josh, we got you, right? So we started pitching this idea of Ardius, and they stopped us halfway, 10 minutes in. They're like, guys, we've heard enough. I said, thank you. Let's just, put us out of our misery. We love it. We love the idea. In fact, we have 4 portfolios, 4 funds that I've never heard of these things. You guys sound like used car salesmen. This is fantastic. The time is now, though. And I'm like, okay, well, and the only problem they found was, this is a tax idea. It needs a tax person. And so the room immediately air got sucked out of the room. They're all looking at me. I'm like, no, guys, I'm done. I got, so the drive of shame was me calling my wife, full circle, right? To your question. Like, how am I going to talk to my wife? How'd the meeting go? I was like, oh, but, and she asked me, and I sometimes think she doesn't listen, but she is literally like smarter than I am. She's like, Josh, to what end are you going to build this? I'm like, wow, you are listening, and I don't know. So I immediately called up some of the partners that we were working with that summer, right? So a lot of the tax credits offset payroll taxes. So I called up Intuit, who had QuickBooks payroll. I called up Gusto. I called up TriNet. I even called up Stripe Atlas. We were working with them a little bit. So these are 4 or 5 suitors, right, that we had been working with. And so I literally set up meetings and said, hey, not the smartest guy in the room here, know that. But what are you doing, right? And it makes total sense. We've been working all summer together. And they're like, yeah, it does. And we are. Don't even think about it, right? And so I was like, great. But what about like marketing? Because I couldn't even find it. I had to go, get rejected by some accounting firms before I found it. And they were like, oh, and these are the last words they said. They said, tax is tough. We're trying to build it, but tax is tough. And I go, don't I know it? 12 and a half years. And so you say, founder market fit all the time, right? And so if there was ever one, I was like, wow. I said, what happens if you can't build it? And the response to me was, well, if you can't rent, you got to buy, right? Very LA thing to say, right? So I was like, okay, well, you know what? We'll see you in a couple of years. I don't know when or if or how much, but, so that's what we did. And so it gave me enough confidence to start this company with this, small, team. But we knew our North Star. We're like, hey, we build it. There's going to be, suitors that will take this. So that's why, I do feel that this way of thinking, I know people will say, oh, but, it's too early. But I had really good, candid, and honest conversations with our possible suitors, and it can happen.
So to recap, the way you've, after having built so many companies, it really evolved your way of thinking about when you're starting it. This one does seem a bit serendipitous that you kind of just were doing kind of a passion project, but at the same time, even during the passion project, once you realized it was real, you're immediately thinking about, okay, exit. What does exit look like? How are the ways to do it? At this point, you probably weren't looking for an IPO because it's such a long road, and this is like, all right, I want to. I've already learned how to exit and sell and be acquired many times over. Let me reach out to my suitors, even though it's super early, even though they may be building it, and then they even told you, hey, yes, we are building it, but you identified there really are challenges, and the fact that you are a startup, you are nimbler than they are. Mm-hmm. You can do things they're not allowed to do, and you don't have a lot of the tape that they do. Or even like if they're fighting over marketing budget, this new venture arm that's unproven may lose out to, the bread and butter that's been keeping the lights on for 50 years. So your advice to founders is like, don't be afraid to share the idea of a secret sauce with a potential suitor early on, and that would, I guess, sounds like it does one of two things. One, it opens up a relationship, so down the line you can keep going back and say, hey, here's where we are, guys, here's what we're doing. And the second part of it could be just validating that it's a real idea, and then if they take it seriously, then immediately, okay, I'm onto something.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to say like give them your roadmap, and but I think there are relationships, I think there are partnerships, I think there's collaborations, right? A little bit of like dating along the way that is totally possible. And what I did notice was that this area is blue ocean. That's what I also felt too. I was like, I hope you do it, because I think it will benefit the ecosystem for startups and small businesses and all that combined. And what was even crazier, and this is totally part of the Ardius journey, was we even helped our competitors. As we were going, I'll give them a shout out too here, but they were thinking about their next thing, and certain people were friends, and I was like, oh, have you guys thought about taxes? Have you thought about bookkeeping, the back office? And they literally, it was just in a conversation, but they're like, okay. So they ended up building something of a competitor to us. And it's crazy because they are good friends, but people will always be like, oh, you gonna let them do that to you, Josh? Like, I was like, no. Like they're friends. And so to the point where, but their strategy was not my strategy, right? Their execution was not my execution, right? No one had 12 and a half years worth of tax background, former CPA. No one had that, number one. But number two, remember the 4 exits? Theirs was not my exit either. And so really quickly, after about 12 months, into Ardius, one of our friends, competitors, frenemies, I guess you call them, right, ended up raising 10 mil at a post 100, right? And I remember my phone blowing up. Oh, Josh, it's like you got dunked on. Like they went first mover. What are you talking about, right? I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you're the venture guy. You're the investor. Like, how could you let them go first? I go, that is not like my goal. Like that's theirs. And the first person to actually congratulate them, me. I actually called them and said, hey, congrats, I heard about the raise. If anything, it started credentializing us, right?
Right.
And my last question to the first friend was, but where do you go from here? Like post 100, like, you're looking at 10X for some institutions, as they come in here, their expectations are 10X. The next bus stop is like $1 billion, but hey, you be you, right? Only to be outdone by another friend just 3-4 months later, right? They go and raise 60 million at a post $500 million valuation, right? And so again, phone blows up, what's going on? But we used that opportunity, right? When they started raising at post 500, I knew from that day, like, hey guys, keyboards down. I think this is a good segue or time to revisit our suitors. So we were only 15 months in to our company, but that was what we needed to kind of start that conversation, which was, did you see what happened? Did you see so-and-so raise at 500? Like, yeah, it's crazy, right? And it was a nice icebreaker, if anything. And then the inevitable question was like, do you think you're worth 500? Right? I'm like, oh no, of course not, So, and then, what's your number? Right? And I go, well, that's the wrong question, right? Kind of a little snarky, of course, and just begging them to ask me like what the right question is. But no, I told them, look, we're at that time we were doing about 10, 20K ACV, right? And trying to figure out, what if you could convert 1,000 of our customers to Ardius, right? At even 10,000, right? ACV, that's 10 million in revenue, right? So what are we getting on multiples today? Like, in SaaS and, like, maybe 8 to 12X. Like, well, then you're getting basically about like 100 million in value, right? So now all of a sudden it doesn't sound too crazy, but all I was concerned about is, are you or are you not willing to share? And when I say that, meaning share, the exit with, our first 10 employees, 10, 12 employees. And that's where we get into cap tables, right? The transition to cap tables, because when you are forming an exit in your mind, right? I want to be very, very clear. When we were doing venture studio, venture building, we would sit down with a potential CEO, founder, or even the first 10 team members. I always do this on all 9 exits, right? Sat down with them and go, what is the number that is going to change your life? What is the fiscal outcome? Because I did this at, my alma mater, UCLA here. Go Bruins. I speak to a lot of universities, founders who, they come in weekly into our office, and I ask them, why did you do a startup? I was about to ask you that, Ethan, when I first walked in. Why are you doing this? This podcast is amazing. What is your end goal? And everyone will tell me, more likely than not, it's because I want to do something creative. I want to work with great teams. I want to disrupt this industry, right? I was like, nobody ever says to me, I hope I work with bad teams. I hope I don't do anything creative. And I hope I, work with really bad. Like, no one says that. The one thing we don't talk about, right, as founders, is money. I know it's funny. No one ever says, you know what, Josh, because I want to get rich. I want to get super rich, filthy rich, I mean, they're just saying, my mentor, Phil, he always says, cash will make you rich, but equity can make you wealthy. Right? I always remember that. And so shout out to Phil, right? If he's listening. So I've always said that, hey, you know what, as a founder, when you're starting something, you're creating something, I know you're busy, making stuff and creating stuff, and you just want to go. The one thing that gets overlooked in the startup phase is the cap table, right? I've always said you need a great lawyer and you need a great accountant. Those 2 things are like inevitable. But they look at me and I go, oh, you've never looked at your cap table. Like you don't, and people will tell me I'll know it's a dead giveaway. When I ask them, what percentage of the company do you still own, depending on your fundraising, and they go, I think I am. So it's like, I think, or they give me a range. Like, I think I'm still 60 to 70%. Like, that's 10% delta. Like, which one is it? And so I know very quickly, like, they do not know. Like, they don't understand dilution. They don't understand the fundraise, how much they've given out, right? Fully diluted. What does that mean? And very quickly, I'm like, oh, we need to have a talk, right? Because number one, and I challenge anyone to come visit me in my office, show me a clean cap table. Show me one. I've had founders who've come in, startups that we've wanted to invest in, and I've never seen a clean cap table yet, right? Unless you're just starting out and like we help you formulate that cap. But if there's history, never seen one. Never have seen one. And so as we start opening up the cap table, start seeing the convertible notes, the safe notes, the priced rounds, even venture debt and the warrants that have been issued, it's all over the place. I had one founder come in recently, a couple months ago, thought they owned 70, 80% of the company. Ended up volunteering his cap table so we could all go through it to learn together, which is what we do.
Right.
And we ended up, noticing a down round and then noticing that his shares were somewhere actually in the upper 20s, right? And you could just see the face and the reaction was like, wow, I feel like now I'm just a glorified employee. I didn't realize I had taken so much on that down round and so I tell founders this all the time. I think, these applications that we've built, like I'm a big fan, right? Like Carta, Cake Equity, shout out, right? Man, these should be sponsors on our next show here. But they're great. Like Cap Shares, ShareWorks, they're great. But we get so comfortable knowing that our percentages are in the cloud. And I would say as a founder, like print it out. Let's go old school, right? This is your roadmap. This is the only thing. I'm being, again, sarcastic, a little bit sarcastic here, but it's the only thing that matters on the exit. After all is said and done, right? What amount in equity in the new company or cash from the payout are you going to get from working all these crazy hours and pouring your sweat and creativity with the team? What are you going to get, right? And it's all laid out like a treasure map, like, right? It's like on this cap table, it literally is here, but no one pays any attention to it. Like literally, it's like, oh, I thought I owned 70, 80. Even that I was kind of laughing. I was like, that's a big difference, 10%,
Right.
And so, and then from there, you just start getting really, really good in the details. Like I, tell people all the time, oh, there's, one group came in, for example, right? This might be another session all together, but had a group come in literally and tell me, oh, we actually have a term sheet for an exit. I was like ecstatic. It's like, congratulations, oh, we're not taking it. I'm like, oh, why not? It's like, well, it's not the price we want. It's too low. So, oh, I respect that. Okay, what's the price? And so they tell me, and then I go, what are you holding out for? He says, oh, we need to be here. I said, this and here, that's not that far. And I started doing the math. And by the way, how long have you been in this company? 4 years, 7 months. I said, okay, it's right around that time. So people get antsy. I go, wait, 4 years, 7 months. And what they didn't realize is like, do you know that the first 10 million can be tax-free? Again, that's all goes back to taxes. The first 10 million can be tax-free, right? Let me see your cap table. Like, how much would that mean to all of you? And started doing the math. I was like, okay, there's this rule, right? If you do this election, it's called QSBS, right? Qualified Small Business Stock. If you wait till 5 years, right? Not a service business, you qualify and make this election and your first 10 million is tax-free. They like almost fell out of their chair, right? I was like, you need to either stall for 5 more months and qualify, or, because I was telling them the funny thing is if you take the lower price, but wait those 5 months, you will actually net more in your pocket than if you actually get the higher price today, because you're going to get taxed on all of it, right? And so again, founders, where are we at here, right? Founders in LA. Like, there are people that know this. There are people like, Ethan, people like myself who want to help. We genuinely want to help. We have no agenda. Like, I don't want to take a percentage of your company. I don't want to, literally, I just want to help. But again, we ask the question, and I think this is a great platform. How do you know what you don't know? I'm hoping someone's listening to Founders in LA with Ethan weekly here, and they go, "What? What is QSBS? It sounds like BS." No, it's called QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. Just look that up. This will pay for itself. All the sponsors, everyone listening, it will pay for itself. But there are people who still come in deer in the headlights who are like, "What are you talking about?" And I guarantee you one thing though. Ask any person with a Patagonia sweater or vest, and they will literally tell you word for word what QSBS, because they know. They know. And you think that they are supposed to tell you that they're going to coach you. No, they're just like, we invested in you, but they may just want you to go raise another round, right? It's like valuation, not to exit or exit smaller, or tax free. That's not their goal, right? And so this is where I love coming on, shows like this and kind of spitballing with you. So
no, man, this is absolutely helpful, and I actually did not know that rule about the first 10 million is free. That's a good tidbit for folks who are listening out there, for sure. Wow. And I think in a previous conversation we also discussed the expectations that come with those rounds, right? So it's almost that in some certain situations the goals of the VC are separate from that of the founder, and that, to your point, a founder who can get a life-changing amount of money, whatever that is for them, and it varies for everyone, so it's worth considering what is that number. But for the founder to leave with that number, it could be very different from what the VC's expectations are, and maybe just quick, let's imagine it's like an intermediate advanced knowledge of how it works, but like let's walk through like different expectations of the valuation of a company, and what does that mean as a founder when you take more money versus less money.
Yeah, and literally this is not like an art versus science thing. I mean, literally I could predict, our first round is like a pre-seed round, we're calling it nowadays. It's anywhere from like 500 to maybe 2 million, and you're going to take like on a convertible note or some sort of dilution of 10%. Then you do a seed round officially with maybe friends, family, and fools, right? They come in, and then there's a Series A, right? And that usually is like anywhere from 2 to 20 million, and you're going to take another 20% dilution. I mean, I could predict with certainty what dilution will be for the founders,
right,
at what stages. And so it's not going to be like guesswork, like, oh, how much we're going to end up with, like as a percentage. And that's why I always have that conversation about what is a number that would be life-changing for your family. I remember talking to some founders, and they gave me a number, right? They're like, "Josh, I just want to be a millionaire. Like 2 million would be fine," right? Like, you've already hit it. Like, what are you still doing here? Like, no, I'm not, because they don't understand valuation, right? They're just like, oh, well, it can come in different ways. I think for that founder, we structured a deal where they would get a salary for $500K for 4 years, kind of like a vesting. That's 2 million, right? I was like, you didn't tell me how it had to happen, right? You didn't tell me if it was gross, net, taxes, before, after. I mean, so there is that conversation I think that needs to happen. So one of the things that I tell founders all the time is, yes, there's an alignment with your investor, especially you said VCs, in terms of like executing growth, wanting the company to do well. That is all table stakes. Like, yes, that is absolutely aligned. But in terms of like, whether or not returns, 10x to the fund. So a couple things, right? Maybe just in general for people who are listening, just to understand, they need to understand how a venture fund works, right? That's number one. So let's say we have $100 million fund together, right? And, as a general partner, I put in like 10, you put in 10, and there's LPs in there, limited partners, who put in the other 80. I'm just using round numbers.
Right.
But there's this rule of thumb where it's like, oh, there's the LPs are going to get 80, and then the GPs are 20%. So I always thought like, oh, this is the best job in the world because on an exit I'm going to get 20% as a GP. But what people don't realize is that it's the overall fund is how the math has to work. So for example, let's say you and I, we actually started a company together. I put in $10 million into Ethan Corporation, right? It's an awesome company, love the founder, and you actually do 10x for me, right? Like, oh wow, it's fantastic, great. I always ask founders this, test the water. How much do I get as a GP on that exit, right? Usually they'll be like, well, you said 20%. So if it's 100 mil, Josh, you take home 20 mil. I'm like, I wish, right? Like, and most VCs will say the same thing. No, actually the first, return of the fund goes to the fund. So, it's a $100 million fund. So literally we just returned all the money, right? I don't get 20% of anything, right? I might get like 3% management fee here. That's my salary, but I don't get 20 mil. We just barely repaid the fund. Now, if there's another exit, right? And I'll just use Julio's name because that's the reason why I'm on the show. Let's say Julio has a company and he only exits, poor Julio, only exits for $1, right? But here's the thing. Of that $1, I actually get 20%. I actually now get 20 cents. I got a check written,
because the fund has already been covered.
It's already been covered.
It's been paid back.
And then the 80, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
So there's this expectation for them. Just understand their alignment is like, oh, we got to repay the fund. Now, that was a best case scenario. What if the fund's been deployed, right? And all other companies that have gone before you, like some have succeeded, some have failed, but we're only at 20 million. We've returned 20 million of the fund. And you're the last company, Ethan, in my fund number 1, right? To save the day. And I put in 10 mil on you, right? So all of a sudden you come like screaming, Josh, just got an offer, right? An offer at what? At 50 million, right? Oh, that's ecstatic. That's going to change the life of you and your family. I'm so happy for you. Oh, but I'm sorry, I'm going to veto it. Now, I'm not going to make all VCs out to be bad guys. Please don't misinterpret this, but I'm just trying to give extreme examples.
Yeah.
Right. So we've just returned 20, right? Now you have the last exit, I guess, is 50, right? So come back in. I've only hit, 70, right? I actually didn't return any money, and that's all she wrote. Moving on to the next fund number 2. I'm sorry, and then I don't get a carry. They don't get. In fact, you know what? If I really believed in you, I might even veto your exit. I might say, you know what? That's not good enough. You're like, what are you talking about? It's 5x from where we first started together. No, I'm sorry. Like, I think we're gonna have to. I would need you to do it. I might sarcastically say, oh, I need you to return whatever that number is, just to get back to 100, right? For me, like I need like 80. So, I need at least an 8x, right? Then you can, and if you can do 9, that'd be great. So when you take money, there comes expectations of different sorts. One is the return, depending on how their fund's doing. And you don't know to ask whether you're the beginning of the fund investment or at the end of the fund investment, right? Because the attitudes can change. I had one VC we worked with back in the day was like, Josh, take your time. I believe it's all good, right? And that's because I was like one of the first investments, and the fund was like a 10-year fund, or I think 5-year fund. So take your time. The second time around, same VC, we were at the tail end, and they did have a bad, result for their majority of their fund, and so they were, Josh, do you have an update? Do you have an update? Do you have an update? Like, whoa, same VC. Why the change in attitude? It was because our fund position was different. And we're in the time of that fund.
Literally just the timing in which you were signing the deal, and by the time that they approached you or the terms came to be, there were some failures early on that they all of a sudden knew, oh, there's building pressure. So instead of getting the time that you wanted to grow slowly into the growth you were looking for, you need to fast track in order to make up for the deficit of the
or that exit that I had gotten a term sheet for to exit wasn't good enough, wasn't high enough, right? And so there is this mentality you've heard, VCs say, oh, 10x, 10x, 10x. And I used to be offended even when people said, hey, you're not venture backable. I remember hearing that. Sometimes I'm like, I'm very venture backable. I didn't understand the word venture in front of it because it just seemed like, oh, you weren't willing to back me. I'm your friend. Don't you believe in me? But really what they were saying was like, no, the mathematics need to work. Like if I invest, I'm going to expect maybe 9 out of 10 to fail, and yours has to at least do a 10x. And if you could do 100, that's what we're in the game for. And so does this investment that we're doing with you, Josh, does this idea even have a market that is big enough to give me 100x or 10x? So that's when I knew when, again, different, perspectives. But when our frenemies were raising 10 at 100, 60 at 500, the expectations couldn't have been, even bigger. Because again, where do you go from, 100 mil, or in this case, 500 million, right? You're talking about, a billion, right? From the 100 million, 10x. And for me, that wasn't our goal as a team, right? So that's why I was super happy for them, called them, congratulated them. But I told everyone else that was blowing up my phone on LinkedIn and everything, like, hey, this is not, what I am trying to do. And my team knew that too, right? We're like, hey, but one thing I will say is, going back to cap tables and valuations, is I do have these conversations with the first 10 employees. Sometimes when we hire the C-suite for our venture studio type companies, we have real conversations about numbers. And I want to get like a floor, not a ceiling, because everyone's going to be like, oh, $1 billion would be great, Josh. But a real number, and I want you to think about it and not just make one up. Some people are coming, 10 million. It just sounds like, baller, and it's 8 figures. So if I gave you 9, you wouldn't take it? Like, no, of course I would. Well, that's not your floor then. What is literally, but I want to have that conversation because, again, I know based on, where we're at in our life cycle of the startup, I know how much equity I can give you. I know how much salary I can give you. And I know the timing, right, of what I think we could exit for. And I'll do the math for you, right? Literally negotiate against myself and go, if we do this right, does this, get to the number that this person who's giving up to me their best next 3 to 5 years of their life, professional years, like I owe it to them to talk through it. Like, is there any guarantee? No, right? But I at least want to know what that number is so that we have eyes wide open expectations, right? And sometimes it goes the other way. It's like, what's your number? Like, you're not a co-founder. Like, I don't think we'll hit that number. And we part ways still as friends, right? Handshake, fist bump, we're good, right? But on the occasion, it's, hey, this is your number, very doable, right? And I might have to increase the percentage, again, negotiating against myself here to get you to that number, but that's what I think we're going to do, right? And I go, hey, welcome to the team, right? I think we can do that together. And so when I add all these numbers up, maybe the first 8 to 12 employees, and I get an offer, for example, that we, is within range, then I know that, hey, this is serious because I might get a number and it hits no one's numbers, right? I'll still, out of fiduciary responsibility, still bring it up. But most of the time it's like, no, Josh, we want to, keep going, and okay, let's go, right? But on occasion, we do get an offer and it's great and it meets everyone's expectations and numbers that provided it hasn't changed, right? It can. I'll take it. So this is why, our last company was sold in 18 months. And 2, very interestingly enough, it was done in a way where I thought everyone's numbers were achieved. And I got laughed at, Ethan. Like, literally, people outside who, don't know the terms or details, they're like, you left so much money on the table. That's crazy. This is 2021, right. June of 2021. And they're right. I mean, money was free. Valuations were through the roof, right? And people were just laughing at us. Now, fast forward to 2023, now 24, same people that were laughing at me were like, Josh, you're a genius. How'd you know to sell in 2021, right? And out of just sheer greed, I was like, oh, it wasn't about getting more and more and more. It's finding the right, company market fit to take us with them, with the resources and the fit. But I knew that everyone's number, at least from the beginning conversations we had, were met. And that's all I was wanting to do, right? Not because I'm like, oh, I probably left this on the table and to get more. But that's where I think talking it out, having candid conversations, it doesn't happen enough. It does not happen enough. Same thing with the VCs, investors, co-founders, and even employees, right? They're taking a ride with you. And so I think if you have that chances of success, or at least trust, right? And transparency, like accountability, that is at least a foregone, like, hey, at least we have that to start our new company together. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. I think part of, to recap, I guess part of what you were saying, it's very helpful as a founder to have that goal in mind, to know exactly to what end are you looking at, so that you don't get blinded by the lights, you don't get blinded by, valuations or things happening around you, that you have a North Star of like, hey, I'll be happy if I do this. And that seems to be one of the recipes that you've seen successful over and over again. So thank you so much for sharing all amazing tidbits. We do like to ground it in LA. It's been one of my favorite episodes. I'd love to hear your most LA moment. It could be tech related. It doesn't have to be.
I think for me, because we're in LA, we're in the hub of LA. Like people will know. I love doing selfies wherever I go, just to document the journey. And then every time I see a celebrity, I do get fanboy. But it's not necessarily, in the way that people think. It might not be like my wife, for example. One time ran into Denzel, it's her and her girlfriends, at the time, and had a great conversation. Like just there was nobody else, and they just chatted away. For me, I'm very good friends with Julio of Crossworld, and it's so funny. Like I wore the shirt for him. It says creator, and like today everyone was like, "What are you eating?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, eat." I'm like, no, it says creator. But there is this group. They call themselves the Fung Brothers. It's like David and Andrew Fung, and they started doing parodies of like songs that are like cover bands with like boba songs. Like I love boba. That's my favorite drink, dessert. And they would take these like crazy songs and do parodies of boba. It's all about boba. And I saw them back when I was in college / just graduating and then working at Ernst & Young. And I literally met them. They were emceeing an award ceremony, a show called the Asian Hustle Network. Shout out to them too. Man, we are really running commercials today. We should really charge this. But I ran into them. And I've always wanted to do something, with them. It's like, hey, I have a lot of brands, consumer product goods. And so this is where the tech and entrepreneurship come together. I go, if I could only meet them and then maybe work on something together, right? And building a brand, or maybe even a brand for them, right? In some of the entrepreneurship and companies. But I met them and I just fanboyed out, like, oh my gosh, I've been following you for, whatever. And like, who is this guy? Why is he approaching us? But to meet them was, again, like celebrities, and we could walk out on the street right now. We might meet someone. But that's LA moments for me.
Oh, yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. Actually meeting the person that you've seen on the screen or seen on stage in person. And then I love the panicking and not actually asking the question you were hoping to ask them.
No, not at all. And we talked right before we recorded. I mean, right across my dorm room at UCLA was when I first met Travis Kalanick, right? Uber, and at that time Scour, and now Cloud Kitchens. But I mean, this is like LA. Like this is what is so awesome about it. We could like literally across the dorm room have a conversation with someone who eventually becomes, celebrity or someone who's made it big. True story. I mean, I'm sure you've watched Silicon Valley.
Of course.
Okay. So do you remember there's a VC in the show? His name is Ed Chu, I believe. And he's the Asian VC, right? He takes over from the other.
He's a
VC.
bro. Yeah, he's very bro.
The bro, yeah. With Ehrlich. Went to high school with him. So Tim Cho is a friend from high school. Saw him at a high school reunion and I go, hey, you're playing the role. You're the VC in Silicon Valley. Love that show. It's so sarcastically funny, but there's subtle truth in all the episodes. And so seeing Tim as well, I'm like, hey, this is great. Like, if you need more anecdotes or stories, like, let me know. I have so many of them. But LA moments, right? Like, a friend from high school is now in a TV show, so it's great.
I mean, we have a fantastic community here. And Josh, thank you so much for sharing just so many great takeaways from today. Looking forward to hearing folks talk about it. Where can folks find you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. It's Joshua, middle initial Y, Lee, and just type in Ardius, Ardius. And for anyone who also, because friend of the show, if they want to use Ardius and they're curious if they've maximized every credit, especially startups or small business, we should probably create a code, just maybe a mention of Ethan or Founders in LA, and we'll do something for free payroll, maybe for tax credits, something like that we could do. And also on Twitter, it's a funny name. It's or X now we should call it, right? Twitter X.
Right.
It's USC Bruin.
USC
Bruin. So I went to grad school, USC, but at the time still bleeding Bruin blue, and still am. Shout out to UCLA again and UCLA Venture. So,
and you got that handle. That must have been early. USC Bruin.
USC Bruin. I don't think anybody wanted it. No one's like, "What? Why are you?" It was a great icebreaker. So USC Bruin or Joshua Wiley on LinkedIn.
Well, can't thank you enough, Josh. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed having you here, and it's so generous of your offer to our listeners. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Nearshore and Unida. I'd like to and as well as ProdHub.ai. Build better products with ProdHub.ai, where innovation meets efficiency. Automate your PRDs, fast track your story creation, and speed up your product team with a single platform. It's your co-pilot for product management. Discover how at ProdHub.ai. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and if you like what you hear, please smash that subscribe button. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on Founders in LA.